I tell you what, it's not like the olden days. I'm Jake.
I'm Rosie.
And this is our podcast about the Incredible Hulk, the Marvel comic superhero, originally created, of course, by Marvel headman Stan Lee, who came on to our TV screens in 1977 and has been there and on our cinema screens in various forms ever since. I remember when I was very young watching the Incredible Hulk TV series, which had 5 seasons between 1977 and 1982. But I don't remember specifically that much about watching the actual series. What I really remember from when I was young is watching the reunion TV movies from 88, 89 and 90, which we'll talk about later in the podcast. But I know I did used to watch the 50-minute episodes of The Incredible Hulk when I was young, and when we watched them through on DVD, there's one specific bit I remember seeing when I was young, so I know I did actually watch the proper series as well. As you can hear on the commentary with Kenneth Johnson, executive producer of the show throughout, and writer and director of the pilot and some other episodes, he was given the chance to create a show about one of a selection of Marvel superheroes, and as the story goes, his initial reaction was, I didn't want to make a show about any of these silly, feckless children's characters. And then he decided to make a serious, character-driven, looking at the human psyche and the duality, Jekyll and Hyde aspect of us, and do it that way, and then tell himself he wasn't making a show about a children's cartoon comic character at all, but a super serious and important grown-up television show about the human psyche. It was Kenneth Johnson who was responsible for changing the Incredible Hulk's alter ego's name from Bruce Banner to David Banner, which he thought sounded less stupid.
I remember somewhere in some documentary Stan Lee telling us about how annoyed he was that they were calling him David, and he phoned somebody up, and his story is that they said, "We thought Bruce Banner sounded a little effeminate." Whereas Kenny's version, apparently people call him Kenny's version is that he didn't want an alliterative name because it was too much like a comic book, and he wanted to be as unlike a comic book as possible, quite obviously. So, somewhere along the line, someone decided that would be the best thing to tell Stan Lee, something that he would interpret as it sounded too effeminate, which is a little bit weird, isn't it? But then, of course, he wanted to change the colour of the Hulk as well. He's absolutely, as you can tell from his commentaries, obsessed with colour symbolism, and he's always got everything yellow in scenes where things are happy. And he says that he was saying to Stanley, well, is he the envious Hulk? I think he takes that sort of thing much too seriously, actually, and he wanted him to be red for anger. But somebody vetoed that, which is wise, actually, because it looked really stupid red. And, of course, as we'll probably discuss, he may not be envious, but he is innocent, which is also symbolised by green, so it works out quite well.
I was watching on YouTube quite recently an interview from more recent years with Stan Lee, where he was talking about his cameo in the trial of the Incredible Hulk, which was his first ever Marvel movie cameo, which he's done ever since, really. And he was very doggedly calling the main character Bruce Banner throughout. I don't know if he'd forgotten that they changed the name, but he just didn't want to acknowledge it.
Probably a bit of both.
Yes, probably a bit of both. So there we are. Kenny had his show, he had his Hulk character who had to be green, and he recruited a main cast for the show. And to play Dr. David Bruce Banner, he got Bill Bixby, who
who is also a bit of a snob when it comes to comic books.
Originally, he'd said, well, I don't want to be in the Incredible Hulk. What do you think I am? I do serious stuff. And Kenny explained to him, oh, no, we're going to do it all serious. It's going to be really interesting. You're going to do all these emotional scenes. It's going to be fantastic. And so Bill Bixby was on board.
Yes, he said that he read the script and was blown away by it and all that sort of thing that actors always say when they've read the script, something that somebody wants them for. Not that I doubt their sincerity, of course.
And when we were watching it through on DVD very recently, Rosie said something like, well, Bill Bixby's only the third best of the three main actors, isn't he?
Did I say that?
It was quite early on. And I said, yes. He is in many ways, but he certainly has the most to do in terms of screen time of the three main actors. But I read a review of The Incredible Hulk on the movie database whilst watching the series, and the reviewer said something like, Bill Bixby brings to the character of David so much compassion and caring and friendliness and so much basically humanity that he interprets the part so well and drives the show so well. And I thought that was a very fair comment.
Yes, he's very good at playing Dr. David Bruce Banner. I think in that Doppelganger episode where there's a gangster who looks just like him, I said his performance as the gangster character wasn't so good and I felt like he was acting. But that doesn't mean he's a bad actor. I think he just wasn't as comfortable in that part. He is very good, of course, at playing David, and he can be very amusing if there's some comedy in the script.
Buster, oh God, for example.
Yes. I was thinking about how the other two actors do get more of an emotional reaction from me, and I think you as well. Maybe largely because we don't see them as often, and then they turn up and we go, yeah, here he is. Whereas Bill Bixby, we are seeing him all the time. If he wasn't there, perhaps we'd miss him. Having said that, there is an episode where he's not there, isn't there? And it works very well.
Yes. If you didn't have the right David Banner and you didn't care about his on-the-run journey and his various jobs and the various different people he meets and interacts with and cares about and helps, then the show wouldn't work, would it? So you would certainly notice if he wasn't doing an excellent job playing David, even though you might not be quite so, oh my God, there he is, because he's there all the time holding it together so well. A bit like Roland in the Extreme Ghostbusters team. Bit of a hark back to a very much earlier podcast there.
I was wondering actually if maybe David's an easier role to interpret, if that doesn't sound too harsh. I think the other two actors bring something to their roles that you wouldn't really anticipate and other actors might not even think of, let alone pull off.
It's very true. By playing David, you're certainly playing a everyman character in a way who fits into a lot of different roles, jobs, situations, and it's perhaps there's more to work with to bring him to life and to make the viewers care about him than the other two main characters who we'll talk about soon. But yes, you'd certainly notice, as I say, if that wasn't happening properly in the show. It's very interesting, that episode without him, and it's a symptom of the fact that Bill Bixby was having all these terrible problems during and in the immediate aftermath of the show. Divorce, dead 6-year-old son, which is incredibly tragic. Ex-wife committing suicide. His life was on a downward spiral, which would eventually end with his death to cancer at the age of 59 in 1993. But really, in his last 15 years, Bill Bixby left us with something very good and very special to be treasured forever in his role as David Banner. And what more can anyone ask than that, really? Next, we'll talk about the second credited character, but not the second most featured, which is Jack McGee, the reporter.
Not from Marvel Comics at all, I don't think, is he?
That's right, an original character for the TV series to give the show an actual other main cast member.
And to keep David moving, of course, someone has to be chasing him.
So they obviously come up with the concept of Jack McGee as a rather flimsy idea, but quite an obvious idea if they're having David on the run, going from place to place, turning into the Hulk and then leaving. And Jack's purpose, yes, is to chase the Hulk, David, around and try to find out the truth of what's going on and write it in his paper, the National Register. And they came into the series with that as all they really knew about Jack. He doesn't really have any consistent characteristics to start with. He's not a fully fleshed character. And keeping him sustainable as a main cast member was something they really did struggle with early on. A big problem is that he wasn't being used by a lot of writers as a protagonist. He appeared to be, in fact, the ruthless, uncaring, poke-your-nose-in, expose people who are on the run, no matter what the consequences, journalist that he appeared at first to be. But someone realised at some point, which is a very important thing to realise, you need to make Jack a protagonist in the series to keep him sustainable. So he uses his powers of journalism for good to expose the petrol station scam where they're blowing up petrol stations who won't sell to the big oil company and that sort of thing. But when he's going, oh my god, it's that disgraced surgeon who's on the run, I have to expose her immediately because I'm an evil journalist, that's not so good and we don't like him and care about him as a character.
The actor, whose name we haven't said, have we? It's Jack Colvin, and he's very good. He was a lot to do with Jack's development as well, the way I understand it, wasn't it? He said to Kenny, apparently, that he wanted to do something other than always turn up and say, I'm looking for a big hulking creature, which actually is very much what he does in the first series.
Isn't it true? And if they'd got an uncaring and uninteresting actor to play Jack, he could easily have been written out of the show and faded away at any time, and probably nobody would really have noticed at the beginning of a new season. But as it is, when we watch it, we want to see him, and we want to see good use of him in the story.
Even before they were really doing anything with him, Jack Colvin was making the role of Jack McGee very fun, wasn't he? Like, when he's waiting for a woman to get off the phone to talk to him, it just makes it really funny.
That's right, he's tapping on the desk and thinking, oh, this woman. And then she finally acknowledges him and he goes, oh, hello, like he'd only just noticed her trying to be polite. It made me say after those very early episodes, he's doing so much with so little, practically nothing, to bring the character of Jack McGee to life. And that certainly does add a lot to the series. The first attempt to make Jack a proper character, a fully fleshed character, where they have a couple of his friends have some evidence to expose these gangsters and Jack gets involved and David and the Hulk, of course, have to step in and save the day. It's not that well done, I don't think. It's kind of sticking Jack into the story and giving him a personal connection just for the sake of it and without really building it up as a part of the character and a part of his life. But they do that much better later on in season 2 and beyond.
I think that's quite a good start and a good experiment to see what else Jack Colvin can do with the character, and I do quite like to watch that one at that stage because it is something a bit different. And they have that interesting scene where he and David are talking on the phone and he is pretending that he's going to answer the door of the hotel room and he's going down the elevator to try and see who's on the phone to him and that kind of thing. And he makes that sort of scene very interesting and compelling, but I agree they do better with it later on.
Yes, and of course if Jack Colvin had utterly failed to bring Jack McGee to life in that first attempt episode, he wouldn't have continued to be a good character to use as a protagonist. But as it is, we get more insights into his life, We see him at home in his apartment in Chicago. We see him at work in the National Register in Chicago. Mark, his editor, appears on screen and they talk about the Hulk and have funny things like Jack, you're costing us a fortune in broken cars and stuff like that. It's always a good different tack if we come in and have some things from Jack's point of view, like he's got the trainee journalist and the man who's pretending to be the Hulk, the man who's pretending to be the man who turns into the Hulk, and you see Jack's reaction to that sort of thing, and you get to see he has integrity and cares about people and wants the press to be used as a force for good and a force for truth, and in that way becomes, as I say, a protagonist.
Of course, finding out that the Hulk is a man who turns into the Hulk is a huge contrivance so that they can do more with the character. In that one where David's got amnesia and he has his face bandaged because Jack's seen him in the pilot and knows who he is, so that's why he has to avoid him.
And he has a bruised larynx, so his voice is different for a bit. And then after that, Jack will always recognise David's voice as the voice of John Doe, the man who turns into the Hulk.
And they have this plane crash, and the pilot just dies outright because he's no use in the episode. Were they trying to go somewhere for treatment for David's burn/amnesia?
That's right. It's a huge 2-part episode with wolves and everything.
Forest fire.
Yeah, in the second half of season 2, and it is necessary at that point to give Jack the information that the Hulk is actually a man who turns into the Hulk, and that's how he gets from place to place undetected. So that after that, Jack isn't just going around saying, I'm looking for this big hulking creature, but I'm looking for a man who turns into this big hulking creature, about 40, light brown hair, which gives a lot more scope for varied and interesting adventures. And Jack and David have various funny meetings where they don't recognise each other, or certainly Jack doesn't recognise David. One where David's the cabbie is very good. He has to put on his dark glasses and his cabbie's hat and pretend he's got the wife at home so Jack won't think he's the man who turns into the Hulk.
Another time he's pretending to be a wrestler and he's got this wrestling balaclava thing on and saying to Jack, he's not here, now get out, and that kind of thing.
Yes, I like the bit where they're talking to each other on the phone and then neither of them realises it's the other one.
Some more examples of humour there. And in this one with the amnesia and the forest and the wolves and stuff, Bill Bixby is amusing when David remembers who Jack is, and they've been getting on very well and working as a team to get out of this situation. He's been pulling Jack along on the wing of the aeroplane because he's got a broken leg and stuff. And then he has remembered who Jack is, and he goes back from where he's been. Jack's saying things, and he goes, "Shut up, Jack!" And he's just being really short with him.
And we're like, oh, he's gone off you now.
But then the interesting thing is when he starts challenging him about why he's chasing the Hulk, and then Jack explains his motivation about how he doesn't like working for a rag like the National Register, and he wants to escape by being this amazing journalist who found out all these incredible things and wrote the story. And it doesn't really sit with the pilot, where they haven't given him this character development. And he says, oh yeah, when I first heard about the Hulk, I didn't believe it, I wasn't really into it. You watch the pilot, he's coming along with this plaster cast of the Hulk's footprint and badgering everyone for information. You think, well, he is into it, isn't he?
No little bacteria did that. He certainly believes in the Hulk at that point as the pilot.
Yes, so you can see how they didn't know how much character development he would have and how it can't really sit with how he was in the pilot for you to like him.
I remember watching that 2-part episode with the wolves and the forest fire and everything, Mystery Man it's called, and thinking, well, this is obviously very big and significant, but what is the point of it going to be? Obviously, Jack's not going to discover the whole truth. And then at the end, when Jack is hanging down the hill and David's got hold of him and starts turning into the Hulk, Jack goes, my God, John, it's you.
He's trying to move this tree off him, which is on fire, isn't he?
And you think at that point, that's the point of all this. It's so he knows that it is a man that he's chasing and not just the Hulk. And then it's very good, the scene in the hospital at the end where Jack's been put in the leg cast and the nurse is coming to give him a shot in his backside.
And he's on the phone to Mark,
phone to Mark, and he says...
He's telling Mark that it's a man who turns into the Hulk. And then Mark's obviously asked, well, what man? But you can't hear him. And then what does Jack say?
He says, I don't know what man. He had his face bandaged.
He doesn't explain it or anything. It sounds really funny, of course.
And we're like, yes, he had his face bandaged. It doesn't now matter why his face was bandaged. It just was, and that's why we don't know what man.
Very amusing by Jack Colvin.
A big step forward for Jack is Stop the Presses in Season 2, which is a very good episode where David visits the National Register headquarters in Chicago in order to get back photos of himself. And he's like, shouldn't really be going in here. And then he joins this tour group, and Jack comes to show the tour group around, so David has to hide behind this sign that someone's holding. It's very good. But that's a good one for Jack because he doesn't approve of the scam where the unscrupulous journalist puts maggots and rotten food in the kitchen of the restaurants and takes pictures of it and says the restaurants are a health hazard.
The interesting thing about that one is that it's written by a couple of writers who do things like Jack's ruthlessly trying to expose this doctor who ran away from her trial, and another person. And we very much suspect that the other person put in those little bits about Jack and his scruples.
That's right. To really develop him as a character, as a protagonist. When I talk about times when we've been watching these episodes, I didn't mention, we first sat and watched them when they were repeated on ITV2 in 2001 and 2002, which is quite a long time ago now. It was shortly after we first got cable television. They were a bit jumpy at times, but they hadn't sorted out the signal yet. But they were extremely interesting to watch on the weekend afternoons, and we really did enjoy them. I remember when Channel 5 was new and we couldn't get it, they had the Incredible Hulk TV series, and I thought, I wish I could watch that, because it'd be interesting to see it again, see what it's really like through more grown-up eyes.
I probably wanted to see it at all, because I don't ever remember watching it as a child, and in fact, as I've told you before, there was a time when I didn't realise it was a TV series. I thought it was just a handful of superhero movies like the Superman movies.
And that's why I mentioned in our previous podcast, Channel 5 trying to buy things and make things like Fort Boyard to fill up their schedule. And The Incredible Hulk was one of the things, like The Adventures of Sinbad, that they did buy early on to put on Channel 5. So it was very good when a couple of years later it was on ITV2 and we just got cable and we were able to watch it. We did enjoy that very much. I think the other thing to say about Jack is that some writers still throughout don't really seem to understand how he feels about the Hulk or how much he understands or knows about the Hulk and John Doe, the man who becomes the Hulk. I always like it when Jack is approaching the whole situation from the point of view of, yes, the Hulk is very dangerous and unpredictable, but he does go around preserving life and saving people, like the one with the gas stations blowing up. Jack is perfectly happy to say, what about the girl who the Hulk rescued? Very different from Alice in Disco Land, when he goes to Alice and says, tell me about when the Hulk tried to throw you off the roof. And when he's talking about John Doe, I like to hear him say, this man needs help, rather than this man is a dangerous fugitive. And certainly in most Season 4 episodes, he's only in one Season 5 episode, Jack. When Jack is around the Hulk, he's perfectly comfortable that the Hulk isn't going to attack him for no reason. And there's the one which is called Bring Me the Head of the Hulk, where the Hulk is feeling quite positive towards Jack and passes him the woman who Hulk has saved, because he knows Jack will look after the woman. But in some episodes, the Hulk is a bit annoyed with Jack because he knows Jack's been chasing David around and trying to tranquilise him and stuff. But David and the Hulk know, or should know, that Jack is a good journalist and a good person, but someone who they don't want to know their secret.
Jack and the Hulk get to really communicating quite clearly and understanding each other, don't they? Like, you're not really going to hit me with that sledgehammer, are you?
Well, no, I guess I'm not. And they both say that just with facial expressions. That's the season 3 episode with the cab driving I was mentioning, so it's got a couple of amusing bits, that one.
It is annoying after all this character development. He won't stop insisting that the Hulk killed David Banner and the other scientist who was working with him, Elena Marks, in this lab explosion that was actually Jack's fault, but no one knows that except the audience. And it was an explosion, and he saw the Hulk carrying Elena out, and he doesn't know what happened to David, even though he actually should work it out. But he will never stop saying, oh yes, the Hulk's definitely killed 2 people, and even when he's able to have a conversation with David's hiding behind these racks of fancy dress costumes. He's saying the creature was trying to save Elena. Jack really ought to completely come round to the idea and say something a bit more than, well, you'll have every chance to prove that in a court of law.
That's right, because it does tally with everything he's seen and knows about the Hulk, and is quite happy to say in other episodes, yes, he rescues people. So yes, they can never let it interfere too much with the status quo of how much Jack understands the Hulk. And, like many shows, they're reluctant to change the status quo or adapt it too much as they go through, but they do it a bit, so we must give them credit for that. I like the bit in the 2-part season 4 opener called Prometheus, where a bunch of guys think the Hulk is an alien, and Jack's coming saying, no, he's not an alien, he's the Hulk, and Jack is on the staircase trying to persuade David to come and be investigated and looked after and helped by the scientists.
Is that where David's stuck halfway as the Hulk?
He's stuck halfway.
And Bill Bixby does the close-up face shots with makeup on, and then in the longer shots it's clearly not him, it's a middling-sized, quite muscly, not as muscly as the Hulk wrestler.
That's right.
An interesting idea, that.
And when Jack's pleading to David, these people want to help you. You told me you wanted to be rid of the creature. This could be your chance. I always think, well, he's not lying. He wants to know the truth. He wants to get to the bottom of it. He wants to see the murder situation resolved. But he does have a lot of concern for John and his problems with the Hulk and wants to see it sorted out. So you can see that more compassionate side to his character coming through, which is a very good thing to include. Well, the other main cast member is, fairly obviously, Lou Ferrigno as the Incredible Hulk, the titular character. And he actually is the only actor who turned up and provided some new material for each new episode, and he was certainly very dedicated to the role. Now, of course, the interesting thing is that Lou Ferrigno was a last-minute replacement in the 1977 pilot movie for an actor who was very tall but not very muscular, and they filmed some of the pilot, the scene at the lake where the Hulk chucks the guy into the lake, the guy who shot him in the arm.
I mean, he doesn't do things like that for no reason.
And this was shown, this scene, to
Kenny's son, I believe. It was the director's son, and Kenny was the director, wasn't he?
Yes, it must be Kenny's son.
And he was responsible for the casting too, wasn't he? So it's worth saying to him, Daddy, that's not the Hulk.
And Kenny said, why not? Look at him, he's 6'9" or something.
I think 7 feet is what he said, even if he was exaggerating.
And Kenny's son said, yeah, but he's not muscly. The Hulk has huge, bursting out of your shirt muscle.
Yeah, but he's not big like the Hulk, is what Lou Ferrigno tells us this child said.
So obviously, Kenny then realised, and this is the right thing to realise, what they needed was a very tall bodybuilder who was also a good actor. And that is the exact accurate description of Lou Ferrigno.
He'd had some success as a professional bodybuilder, hadn't he?
Yes, he had. He'd become Mr. Universe very recently.
Oh, yes, quite some success. So that's how Kenny was able to find him. He thought, right, he's Mr. Universe. I'll see if he's tall enough. Arnold Schwarzenegger auditioned for the role, didn't he? But he was too short.
He was too short at 6'2", and of course Lou Ferrigno's 6'5". So that's exactly the right height to be a lot noticeably taller than most people, but not weirdly tall and looking funny with all your big muscles. Just perfect size to be the Hulk. And he was, 25 when he first started filming it, so he's the thick end of 20 years younger than the other two main actors, had a lot less acting experience, but goodness me, doesn't Lou Ferrigno add just as much, in his own unique way, to the show as Bill and Jack? Well, yes, he certainly does.
He's the one we all want to see, isn't he? If we're tuning into The Incredible Hulk, we want to see The Incredible Hulk, and it's always hooray when he turns up.
Yes, we demand our 2 Hulk outs per episode, otherwise it's a terrible letdown. If there's one new Hulk out and some flashbacks, we're like, ugh. But that only happens in special episodes, like, for example, Mystery Man and Interview with the Hulk. The one thing they say about The Incredible Hulk in interviews, I think Lou Ferrigno said something to this effect, and Kenny and probably Bill Bixby, they very much wanted to present the Hulk as a creature rather than a monster. And that's what they did in the series. He is the primal, instinctive part of David's nature, as well as, of course, the great strength, which is accessed at times of extreme emotional negativity. And anything he does, like throw people in the lake and break stuff, is not from malice, but from, as Rosie was saying earlier, innocence and just very basic primal reactions to situations.
That's why another annoying thing is the time when he accidentally, through his strength and unthinkingness, makes someone need an emergency tracheotomy. And we knew that was going to happen last time we watched the DVD. We couldn't remember the circumstances. And it happens because some people are coming along in their Land Rover, and the Hulk, just without being bothered by them, without them coming anywhere near him, picks up a tyre or something.
He rips the spare tyre off the other Jeep
and throws it at this newly arrived Jeep
without any trigger.
So then the guy falls onto the steering wheel and he needs an emergency tracheotomy, and actually it's the episode with this disgraced doctor who ran out on her trial in fear of becoming disgraced, in which Jack is relentlessly pursuing her for the sake of publicity.
Yes, bad characterisation on Jack and the Hulk there. But you don't need, of course, to force a situation where the Hulk endangers someone's life accidentally in a way that doesn't make sense. It's very easy to have someone's life be endangered by the Hulk's thoughtlessness and savagery, and you don't need to force it. But of course, as we know from the pilot, the Hulk will not attack to kill or fatally injure, because that's not in David's nature. But any of us could accidentally kill someone in a moment of rage.
Especially someone very strong.
And with the Hulk, yes, it's more likely to happen because he's so strong and so primal and savage.
Very disappointing to see him hurling a spare tyre at somebody's Jeep for no reason. He didn't even know who was in it.
I thought one of Bill Bixby's best delivered emotional lines was in that episode with the possibly disgraced surgeon and the Jeep. He says to the surgeon, "I don't believe you attempted to operate on the patient because you were arrogant and wanted to push the boundaries of medicine and be recognised as a great doctor. I believe you tried to save her life because you're a surgeon and a human being. And I believe you failed because you're a surgeon and a human being." I thought that was very well delivered, quite thought-provoking.
A good bit of story and a good bit of writing and acting between those two. Unfortunately, they messed up on Jack and the Hulk in that episode.
But the other thing that Lou Ferrigno did so well was to show us the other side of the Hulk's innocence and primal nature when he's not angry and smashing things, where he is interested in and touched by things in the world like animals and children and babies, and we see that, like Frankenstein's monster, he's just interested in a world that he doesn't understand. Because that world doesn't understand him, it will treat him as a monster. In that very early one at the zoo, where he's gone up to the child and she's holding his hand and saying hi, and he's sort of smiling at her, and the mum sees it and goes, "Oh my God, get away from that monster," and makes the Hulk riled up. And that shows how it's how you treat him that makes him seem like a monster. I also like the bit in that one where he's petting the tiger cub, and of course the mother tiger doesn't mind the Hulk petting the cub.
Animals trust the Hulk.
The animals trust him, and then he turns back into David, which happens when he calms down and or stops being stimulated by the world around him. And David's like, "What am I doing stroking this tiger cub?" And the mum's going, "Oh, I don't really trust you," so David has to leave the enclosure.
One of my favourite bits is towards the end of Mystery Man, where David's been trying to pull this flaming tree off Jack and turn into the Hulk. Jack's got this broken leg that's about to be gangrenous, and the Hulk wouldn't understand and, remember that, but he would know that Jack needs help quickly. And he carries him down to the road, and this car comes along with two parents and a daughter in it.
Yes, it's the fire marshal who's gone to save his family earlier in the episode.
Oh, I forgot that bit, but the fire marshal and the fire marshal's wife are all like, "Oh my God, we have to drive away from this terrible monster," and then he lifts up their car so they can't drive off, and the daughter's going, "That man's hurt, he wants us to help him," and they're saying, "Oh, don't be silly, child, we need to drive off," and then she says, "No, we're going to help this poor man," and gets out of the car, and she says to the Hulk, "It's okay, we'll help him," and then the Hulk smiles, because even if he hasn't understood the words, he's understood the sentiment.
That's very well done.
I also like the bit where Ricky, who I think we should talk about actually, is getting soda with him. The soda dispensing machine, vending machine, isn't working, and then the Hulk rips the front off, so there's all this soda for them. And Ricky, who is what they called a retard, is showing him how to open the can of soda, and then the Hulk takes a sip from the soda and smiles because it's nice, and I think that's a good scene too.
It's interesting. They're saying there that Ricky, despite being 20-something years old, is like a child and thus trusts the Hulk in the same way. Perhaps they wouldn't want to really say that about a retarded, as they call it then, character nowadays.
Americans still are much more comfortable with the word retarded than we are in this country. But yes, Ricky is the name of the episode, and the character's played by an actor who is not retarded, or whatever word you want to use. Whereas by the time you get to Quantum Leap, which is really the child of the Incredible Hulk in many ways, they get what I'm tempted to call a real retard, but I'm sure that's not the right thing to say at all, is it? Someone who has the condition, whatever it is, I'm sorry, I don't know, to play the character.
I think it is actually Down syndrome, that Jimmy in Quantum Leap.
Right, yeah, that sounds very familiar, actually. Whereas if you asked whoever wrote Ricky what condition does he have, he would answer like Cartman's mom in South Park when he's pretending he's retarded. And then they don't know what the condition is. He's thick, to be perfectly honest with you, and childlike, and has a bit of a thick-sounding voice. Yes, things like that. He really struggles to function at all, and it's particularly patronising, I think, judging it from the 21st century point of view, where he puts the spanners, because they work in this garage, he and his brother, he puts the spanners in size order, and it's like a huge achievement for him.
Does that look wrong to you, Ricky?
And then for 30 seconds or so, he's staring at these spanners that are in the wrong size order, and then he swaps two of them round and looks so pleased with himself, like a 1-year-old who's walked across the room. And it's very different from the way that special people with difficulties, conditions of this kind are portrayed nowadays, and some years earlier in Quantum Leap, because a very interesting thing is that Ricky ends up in an environment which is specially designed for retards and does sort of special needs art and sculpture there, and is kept away from the community, whereas the point of the Quantum Leap episode is to get Jimmy living in what I want to call normal society, but I probably shouldn't, living in society with everybody else. And it's interesting how the ideology has changed and our understanding of people has changed, because Ricky, it just doesn't sit right now, does it, the way that he's represented? But they didn't know that at the time, so I'm not saying anything against them.
And the idea that David introduces, that Ricky should be going to this school for special people, is a groundbreaking idea, that he should have some sort of education and integration with other people at all.
Yeah, so it is actually a step forward from where we were before.
Yeah, so we must certainly judge these things in context. And yes, very interesting to compare attitudes across the different times. Because yes, it's the thick end of 40 years since Ricky was made. Of course, we know for sure that he didn't have any kind of condition, because his actor, like so many of the Incredible Hulk guest actors, actually turns up again twice more in the series in other roles.
A lot of Quantum Leap episodes you can see were inspired by Incredible Hulk episodes, and that's one of them, I think, where there's a brother looking after the retard, or whatever you want to call the character. But the ideology, the thinking about people with special needs has moved on, so that's very different. And I suspect, much like we've been doing, when they made that episode of Quantum Leap, they weren't trying to say it's wrong what the Incredible Hulk did, but they very much are saying it has changed.
So going back to Lou Ferrigno for a moment, he brought the natural skill that was needed for playing the Incredible Hulk in his angry, smashing things up, and innocent, curious about the world, liking, helping children and animals personas, and they can't have known that he'd be that good at it when they hired him at the last minute. He's only 25, he hadn't done that much acting. He was absolutely perfect for it, and that's a huge part of why the show works so well. Obviously, they could tell that he was 6'5" and had done a lot of bodybuilding and was suitable for a Hulk in that way. But the other part of it, the happy accident, really, like all the best things. And it's very interesting listening to Lou Ferrigno's interviews and reading about his life, how he was ill when he was very young and lost 75% of his hearing, and his father was a lieutenant with the NYPD and was very hard on him in some ways, and Lou Ferrigno turned to fantasy, Hercules comics and the Incredible Hulk to cheer himself up, and turned to bodybuilding to feel good about himself, and the Hulk was one of his dream roles. So was Hercules, which he played after the Hulk, or between the Hulk TV series and TV movies anyway. So he got to live out his dream in many ways. Some things you read about his NYPD lieutenant father seem quite supportive, like buying in the comics, and then sometimes he seems like a right douche, coming and saying you live your life in a fantasy world, get out there and do something. Don't want a deaf son. So I guess Lou Ferrigno's father may have inspired the duality of the Hulk in some way. But yes, a very interesting person, a very interesting actor. And another thing he tells us in his interviews is that he had acting classes between playing the Hulk on TV series and in the TV movies 6 years later. And we actually noticed in the TV movies, before hearing that interview, how he was playing the Hulk differently. Much more savage, much more angry, much more threatening. And originally we said, oh, look what the TV movie makers, Bill Bixby directing and making Lou Ferrigno do. He's not coming across nearly so much as the innocent, childlike creature, but more of a monster. And that's partly to do with how the movies are made, of course, but I do think Lou Ferrigno's acting classes encouraging him to overdo the anger probably contributed to that as well.
I think you said that his acting classes influenced how he played the Hulk after that, so there's proof.
Yeah, so he plays the Hulk much better actor and as a much more complete and rounded character in the actual TV series than he does in the TV movies. Obviously, he has the time and scope and direction to do that more in the TV series, but it is a factor and a big part of why the three TV movies are so inferior to the television series. But I do think Lou Ferrigno as the Hulk is one of the most immersive pieces of transformation with makeup, extra body parts, and also acting that you get for turning an actor into a character. And my other two big examples of that are David Suchet as Hercule Poirot between 1988 and 2013, and Christopher Reeve as Superman / Clark Kent in all his various different forms and guises in the movies between 1978 and 1987. I think those are my top three immersive acting performances, where if you see an interview with the actor, you think, goodness me, that's a real, complete, immersive transformation into the character. Whereas most times, people do a fantastic performance in their acting, but you see an interview with Bill Bixby and, well, it's Dr. David Banner, isn't it? Just being Bill Bixby in real life.
Of course, another couple of actors in the TV series who I believe aren't credited for their contribution are the men who are the voice of the Hulk, who do the roaring and growling and less aggressive noises. Originally, that was Ted Cassidy, who's, I think, best known for playing Lurch in The Addams Family, which tells you that he's a very tall, very big man with a deep voice.
He really was almost 7 foot tall, wasn't he? Which is why he had persistent heart problems, which eventually killed him during the second season of The Incredible Hulk. Very sad.
Yes, you can imagine that heart with that much body to pump the blood around would have some trouble. He also does the voiceover that introduces the premise of the series, doesn't he? Dr. David Banner, a physician scientist, etc. And he was very good at roaring and growling, and unfortunately, as you say, he died, and then someone else had to do that, and I can never remember his name.
His name was Charles Napier.
Oh, yes.
And he guest starred in a season 3 episode and a season 5 episode and TV movie The Incredible Hulk Returns. And once we knew that he'd taken over, as it were, the role of the Hulk, but they still used some archived Ted Cassidy vocalisations as well. But once we knew that Charles Napier was providing all the new voice work for the Hulk, I thought it did actually show. It took him a while to get into the role, didn't it?
Yes, I think his earlier roaring is very much inferior to Ted Cassidy's, but then I think he does get into it and it does get better.
I thought originally he was doing it very much from the throat rather than the deep, huge inner core like Ted Cassidy had. And when we saw Charles Napier in the Chain Gang prison episode, which is one of the early ones where he also voices the Hulk, or partly voices the Hulk, I was saying, yes, he's a big, beefy, muscly man, but he's not actually that tall. He's not that much taller than David, Bill Bixby, who's reasonably small, so when he gets beaten up every episode so he can turn into the Hulk, you believe it. So I thought that rather explained why it didn't come so naturally or easily to Charles Napier to get a lot of coming up from his core rather than just roaring in the throat. But then, yes, he certainly did get into it, like anyone who plays a role for a couple of years.
Does he do the roaring in the movies?
Well, I haven't actually read whether he does or not, but he probably does.
It makes sense as he was actually there, confirmed acting in one of them.
And how ironic, possibly, that Lou Ferrigno provides no actual voice work for the Hulk in the TV series itself, but went on to voice the Hulk in the 1990s couple of animated TV series versions. And, indeed, in Avengers movies, last decade and this decade.
And did he do it in that one with Edward Norton and Eric Bana? I don't know. I only thought the Edward Norton one, but perhaps he did it in the Eric Bana one too. I just don't know.
I'm not sure about that. He has cameos in both of those as a security guard, so he was certainly there. Possibly provided some Hulk vocalisation.
They should let him do something other than security guard, like Italian restaurant owner, which is what he aspired to be in the Hulk episode King of the Beach, where he, as well as the Hulk, played a character called Carl, who had to do a bodybuilding competition to raise money to get his Italian restaurant, and people were trying to make him throw the contest and that sort of thing.
It's a very good episode, that, and Lou Ferrigno does a wonderful, warm and endearing and funny performance as Carl. A lot of natural skill coming through again. It's a season 4 episode, that, so obviously he feels comfortable on the show by then. And it's good to see him doing a lot of acting with Bill Bixby, because you don't see them on screen together that much. You see it kind of fantasy hypnotism sequences.
And when he's on LSD, someone spiked his drink.
That's right. The only thing that's really missing from King of the Beach, I think, is Lou Ferrigno as Coral interacting with Jack Colvin as Jack McGee. That would have been fun.
Jack's not in that one, is he?
It's one of those ones where they can't be bothered to put him in.
We noticed the last time we watched how throughout the episode they were creating the illusion that Carl is not that much taller than David.
That's right. They have him leaning in funny positions and David sitting on a high bit of the exercise equipment and stuff.
Probably sometimes he just stands in a hole so David will look taller. But then he is actually on screen with the Hulk using special effects, and the Hulk is taller, and they've been creating that illusion throughout the episode.
Yes, it was well created.
What I like about that episode as well is the woman in it, because there's quite often a woman and she fancies David, or someone's trying to ruin her business or something, and she doesn't usually have very much depth, but the girlfriend character who was having a bit of, well, they weren't there with Carl and then they ended up together, didn't they, had some depth. She had the layer on which she's a con artist and pretends you've knocked her off her roller skates in your car, and also genuinely caring about Carl, and also trying to get him into the bodybuilding so she can have a cut of the profits. So overall, a very successful episode.
Yes, a definite must-watch King of the Beach, as is Stop the Presses and Mystery Man and Interview with the Hulk and Bring Me the Head of the Hulk and Prometheus, and the one where David gets paralysed and has to have a couple of Hulk outs to get feeling in his legs back, and the Hulk stops the other paralysed man robbing the bank.
Yes, that reminds me, is that season 3?
It's 4. It's one of the better later season 4 Desperate for Ideas ones.
It's the season where the writers have sat down and said, well, what if he's psychic for a bit? Well, what if he's paralysed for a bit? Well, what if he's stuck in the middle of the transformation for a bit? And I must say, paralysed works the best of many of those things, particularly psychic. I don't think that was a very good idea.
It's like in Quantum Leap, isn't it, where they've said, what if he's a vampire? What if he's Al for a bit? What if he's a chimp? And the best one of those is he's a chimp. So again, there are more shades of the Incredible Hulk in Quantum Leap, which we will podcast about one day.
Another good one is that one with the woman and her truck, which Kenny is the writer of. I would put this on the best of DVD. They are stealing back, it's hers, so I guess it's not stealing, but taking back a truck that's been stolen for selling illegal computer parts or something like that. And as I said, Kenny's the writer, I think I said that. And it's all done for laughs, and the best bit is the first Hulk out, where these guys are taking the woman off and attacking her. And usually David would run in and say, stop attacking that woman, and they'd beat him up and chuck him out of the window, and then it'd be the Hulk. But instead he tries to phone the police, and the payphone isn't giving him back his dime, and there's no answer at the police station, and the operator is being unhelpful, and he's getting angry. And it's one of the few times when, even though everyone says it's anger that triggers a transformation, it actually is anger. Normally it's pain, isn't it, getting beaten up. And it finishes up with the phone saying, please insert 25 cents. I don't have 25 cents! And then that starts the transformation off. Very funny.
Interestingly enough, actually, season 1 episode there, trying out some different genres there, and that one's very successful. Another season 1 episode I put on the best of is 747, which is the first episode without Jack McGee in it, incidentally, but what it lacks in that, it makes up for in being rather different from the usual formula. That's the Incredible Hulk landing a plane. David does most of it, but the Hulk's strength is what allows the steering column to be pulled back after the hydraulic fluid has been shot out of the pipe earlier.
As we've been implying, but I don't think actually saying, the Hulk is driven by what David's been trying to do. So he's in the cockpit of this aeroplane, and he knows he's got to land the plane, but he hasn't got a clue what he's supposed to do, and he starts picking at the wires and stuff, and they're exploding, and he's like, whoa, what's going on?
David does very well in that one, holding off the full transformation for quite a long time, whilst using the Hulk's strength to pull back the steering column. They didn't really elaborate on that, build on that, getting control of the Hulk while still retaining his own thoughts, which is something they apparently were thinking of coming to, and possibly going to come to in the later TV movie. More about that in a moment.
Some other interesting ones I think we should mention are the one that David's not in, we mentioned earlier, is driven by Jack and Patty Steinhauer, the daughter of the guy who owns the newspaper, saying he's not allowed to chase the Hulk anymore and that kind of thing.
Of course, it's a very good in-joke. The publisher of the National Register is Robert Steinhauer, who is also the real-life supervising producer of the show. Yes, Jack really does an excellent job as the main character protagonist in that episode, and it's interesting to see his thoughts and feelings and recollections about the Hulk. But I did think at the end and say his interaction and relationship with Paddy isn't actually as good or believable as his earlier interaction with his student journalist sort of thing. Pam, yes. No wonder I thought they were the same character originally.
I used to get them mixed up and never know which one to expect. I wonder if I'll remember from now on. But that's a good one too. That's the one that you did mention earlier, with the guy who pretends to be the guy who turns into the Hulk.
And Jack knows that by giving him exposure, they're setting him up for a big disappointment, so he doesn't want to do it.
And Pam's wet behind the ears and tenacious and uses Jack's name to publish her article, and then it makes the guy want to throw himself off the bell tower and that kind of thing.
So a better thought out episode overall, that, than the one without Bill Bixby in it, but both well worth putting on the best of.
And one more interesting one I think we should talk about a little is, I've forgotten the name of it now, the one with the other Hulk.
Oh yes,
The First?
The First, which is a two-parter from season 4. So again, what if there was another Hulk?
Yes, a somewhat evil man who in the past has been turned into an Incredible Hulk by some other scientist and then cured and wants to be the Hulk again, ostensibly, and at least partially anyway, truthfully, to cure his arthritis, but also because he likes being able to beat people up and stuff with his super strength.
He's called Del Fry.
That one isn't very good for Jack, is it? He doesn't protect the Hulk when somebody wants to shoot him.
Jack always protects his Hulk when someone's trying to shoot him, except in that one bit.
Yes, and he accepts that this elderly, arthritic man is John from the woods.
There's no way he would do that. He knows John is a man with light brown hair about 40, not a 60-year-old grey-haired man. And in the one you were just talking about with Harold, who pretends to be the man who turns into the Hulk, he says to Pam, Jack says to Pam, look, I spent a week in the woods with this guy. I know him well enough to know that Harold is not him. Certainly knows him well enough to know that Del Fry isn't him either in real life.
So that's a bit annoying. I do think the whole revelation of what's going on is built up to very well. He's finding out that David is an Incredible Hulk, and he says to him, "Who did it?"
Yeah.
Which I thought was very clever, because we've been assuming that the scientist made himself into the Hulk, but no, it was this sort of janitor person.
Yes, his lab assistant, as it were,
Mm.
who's been janitoring around the old house since the scientist's death.
And then he's telling David about when he was a Hulk, and he says, I was moving something and I hurt my back, and I was annoyed with myself that I'd been moving things because I knew I probably would hurt my back. And then another time I was in this bar getting beaten up, and it sounds very much like the sort of thing David does.
Yeah.
And perfectly understandable.
Yeah.
Then David's trying to cure himself, and Del Fry starts saying, "Oh, will you make me a Hulk so I can cure my arthritis?" And David's saying, "No, I don't think so." And then he knocks David out and turns himself into the Hulk.
And he's saying, "I want to get my own back on those people in the town who laugh at me." And David's like, "Oh, you shouldn't be doing that."
Yeah, I think before that he's saying things like, "I want to be strong again." And you think, he's old and arthritic, but then he also means, "I want to go and deliberately get myself beaten up and turn into the Hulk."
Yeah, it's true. It's well built up to all that.
And then it turns out that he has, in his human form, killed someone deliberately and maliciously.
He had a comment.
So then you know that his Hulk is doubly dangerous. And yes, there's a thing about someone being killed by this Hulk, isn't there? And he's saying to David, "Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I was this Hulk. You can't be responsible."
And David understands that. He's come close a couple of times himself.
So I thought that was very well done. Having him Hulk out instead of David for one of the Hulk outs is very disappointing.
That's right. We only get to see the proper Lou Ferrigno Hulk once in each of the two episodes in the two-part story there, which is rather disappointing, but certainly one to watch and one to include in any list of significant episodes.
Yes, I like the bit where the two Hulks are having a Hulk fight. It's a bit like in Superman 2, where Superman is fighting the other Kryptonians. It's an even match.
There's a bit in the fight with the two Hulks that's the same as when Superman first comes up against one of the Kryptonians, where the Hulk's like, "Well, he's not going to be able to do anything to me. I'll just put my chest there and it'll bounce off like everybody else." And then, it didn't. He's as strong as me, or nearly as strong as me. So he has to come back and make more of an effort and eventually win through, just like Superman.
Good stuff, but could have been better if they'd used Jack properly.
Yes.
Would have been.
Like quite a few episodes, really. So as you can perhaps tell, the show overall was running out of a bit of steam by season 4. And actually, season 5 only has 7 episodes rather than the usual sort of 18 to 20, like seasons 2, 3 and 4 have. Because the new network heads came in and said, "Look at the budget on this show, all this location filming, different actors, 20, 30 different actors every week,
all this green makeup.
Yes, we can't afford to make this show." Apparently it had been suggested at some point to get down production costs by having David have a travelling companion with like a motorhome, yes, camper van, Winnebago, I think the right thing to call it.
RV.
So we have a regular other character and a regular set and reduce it to one Hulk out per episode. All those changes would have made it rubbish. So what they really should have done was wind down the show and get to Kenny's season finale that he wanted to make, where Jack learns the truth and the Hulk cleared of murder and David's cured and everything was lovely. Wouldn't that have been nice to see at the end?
And we maybe see his family again. We didn't mention the episode with his father and sister.
That's right.
That's one of those ones with a hilarious wraparound where it takes something totally out of context, like David's breaking into a shed and then it explodes. And that one, he is running after a plane that his father's taking off and going, "No, Dad, no!" Climbing onto this airplane as it's taking off. And these things make much more sense when you actually watch the episode in context.
Yes, we always watch the wraparounds when we put the new DVD in, just to remind us what's coming up in the episode and get a feel for it. Well worth doing. Another thing I wanted to mention, actually, about the first with the other Hulk was how when the new Hulk or other Hulk causes the cure to be lost, It's the one irrefutable time where David transforms because of sadness, desperation, despair, rather than anger, pain, with a more introverted negative feeling than we're used to seeing him have when turning into the Hulk. And the Hulk, when he's transformed after David's been sad and crying, is quite docile. He doesn't start ripping things up. He's just standing there looking sad. And then he gets into fighting and ripping things up when the other Hulk attacks him. But there'd really be no danger from the Hulk that resulted from David crying. He just sort of stands there being sad, unless you start attacking. But the reason I remember that is that arguably he has the sadness transformation in the one with his family, but there's more to it. I can't remember exactly how it goes now.
That Hulk out in the first family one, he's been dreaming about his dead mother and feeling angry towards his father, hasn't he? So he goes to his father's farm as the Hulk and he's standing outside like, I'm going to knock over your haystacks.
Very Jekyll and Hyde, which is something they allude to quite a few times in the series. That one where the Hulk sees the photograph of his father and smashes it up and gets angry. And they sometimes put in interesting things like that. But as I was saying, yes, the show was running out of steam, and as they do, they try and prolong it. They don't do the season finale.
I always wanted to know how it would go down when Jack discovered who David was and stuff like that.
He'd have been like, oh, that was obvious.
Yes, he should.
But they did manage to make, before it was ingloriously cancelled mid-season, these 7 episodes of season 5. The best one of which we agreed was the one where David's being the prison laundry delivery guy and goes on the run with the 3 prisoners, one of whom is about to have some twins. Doesn't know it's twins, of course, that's a bit of a complication. And the prison warden is overzealous and wants to kill one of the prisoners for personal beef. I think that's by far the best one in season 5.
Yes, and David hurts his hand, so when one of the twins is breached, you have to tell one of the prison women to turn the baby and that sort of thing, and she's been planning on running away, and then she comes back and decides to face a prison sentence, and there's lots of interesting characterization like that.
That's one of the injuries that requires 2 Hulk outs to fix it, David's crushed hand, for the plot. Which isn't as annoying as when the Incredible Hulk doesn't leave wherever David is trapped, like the mental institution, after the first Hulk out, just for the plot. And then he'll wait to turn back into David and get recaptured or whatever, and break out for the second Hulk out, because that's what the episode needs. But obviously you'll get a bit of that sort of thing when making TV show episodes.
I think it must be very difficult to write a lot of perfectly organic episodes of The Incredible Hulk where each Hulk out and the consequences make perfect sense. I wouldn't fancy doing a virtual season of it.
Oh no. But the other episodes in season 5 overall were quite weak. They only managed to sneak Jack into one of them, and it was one of those ones where he obviously wasn't in the original draft and didn't really do anything to interact with the plot. It was just hanging around trying to get into places and seeing the Hulk, which was rather disappointing because there's lots of good things to do with Jack. And we noticed in season 5 it was a lot of different new writers, and the Hulk really wasn't being consistent and having actual things to do when he turned into the Hulk. It's good if he has someone to rescue or something specific to do, rather than just crashing down a wall and then turning back. It was a bit aimless, I think, for a lot of season 5. It was a tired show and really needed someone to take it in hand and finish it off properly, rather than get ingloriously cut off mid-season. In the final episode, which has some E. coli poisoning in this ghost town sort of thing, there is one of the Hulk's greatest moments of strength where he stops and pulls up the elevator that's going down so he can get at the guy in it and chuck him around. So I put that in my list of see the Hulk's greatest feats of strength, so that's worth watching. Other ones on that would include where he stops the hydraulic press from crushing the car, and where he pushes back the tank, the army tank. Always good to see the Hulk's greatest feats of strength there. Remind us what his USP is, I suppose. But yes, overall season 5 is quite weak, and it would have been a good time for the show to come to a proper conclusion. Shame they didn't do it properly. But as we've been saying, after 6 years, the show stopped production in 1981 and the final episodes aired in the middle of 1982. And then, in 1988, The Incredible Hulk Returns was made as a TV movie. And Nicholas Correa, who'd done a lot of writing and directing of the real show, although he didn't understand Jack that well, wrote and directed The Incredible Hulk Returns. And in it, you can see signs that it could have been a decent successor, follow-up and carry on of the show. But unfortunately, I think the main iffy issue with these Incredible Hulk movies is the idea that they were going to be used as backdoor pilots, launch platforms, for other Marvel superhero TV series. Now, The Incredible Hulk Returns has Thor in it, one of the Hulk's fellow Avengers. And Thor doesn't fit very comfortably into the established world of the Incredible Hulk that we know from the TV series, which is a huge problem. But, as Rosie will explain, he's used quite well in the context of that particular film. Whereas in 1989's offering, The Trial of the Incredible Hulk, Daredevil is the guest backdoor pilot superhero. He does fit perfectly well into the established sci-fi world of the Hulk, absolutely fine, but he and the Hulk are not integrated and matched up properly and well in the movie, and that's a missed opportunity. So there's one aspect wrong in each of those two movies.
Yes, there is a third movie which we'll talk about, but I just want to clarify that there is when I say I think, having watched the three movies recently, The Return of the Incredible Hulk is the one I don't mind as much as the others, because none of them are that much good, to be honest. But a few reasons. One is that they get increasingly more theatrical,
as Al Gore would say.
So the first one, I mean, Thor itself, you have to be a bit fun and silly, don't you, for that character to work. So it has certainly the best tone and the closest to the TV series. It also has more of the Hulk than you will see in The Trial of the Incredible Hulk. And overall, it's got the best structure for a Incredible Hulk plus other superhero movie, which The Trial of the Incredible Hulk does not have, which we're going to talk about after this. In terms of the bits of story where David and the Hulk are actually in it, they meet, or David meets, Donald Blake, which I assume is his name in the comic. No one came messing about changing it from Billy Blake or anything, did they?
I think that is right. Of course, in the comics, he actually turns into Thor.
Oh, he does he?
Yes, they change for the movie. He still channels Thor's spirit into this world through the hammer, but Thor has a separate body.
As Donald explains to David, and the thing that Daredevil has over this is that it fits much more neatly in the established universe of the Incredible Hulk, which is very sciencey, science fiction rather than fantasy. So I always used to think, well, I suppose I still do, Daredevil's a better idea, but actually I don't know that it's a better film with what they do with it. But yes, David meets Thor, and what actually happens I can't even remember. Does Thor start chucking him round and throw him at the computer console and things?
That's right. David is doing, as he is apt to do, an experiment on himself to try and get rid of the Hulk. And the audience is thinking, oh, we're going to see the Hulk again after 6 years. And Donald Blake comes in and removes the CD from the machine to stop it happening. And it goes into the backstory of Thor. As Rosie was saying, a fantasy story rather than a sci-fi.
Yes, he starts telling the whole story of how he was on this sort of mountain trekking archaeology expedition, doesn't he? And we're like, I thought we were going to see the Hulk.
We should have seen the Hulk before we heard about this. Imagine how disappointing that is. Oh, we're about to see the Hulk. Oh, we're getting a flashback about Thor. And then we see Thor. And then, fortunately, Thor does start pushing David around for no real reason other than to trigger the transformation into the Hulk. But then you get the fight between Hulk and Thor, after which they become friends, working against the bad guys in the movie. And you were telling me that was a very good aspect of the movie, the two superheroes becoming allies and working together, which they just don't do in Daredevil.
Yes, that's the effective structure I was talking about. They have a bit of a fight, then they become friends, then they work together to sort out the baddies. I can't even remember what the baddies are doing, something in a warehouse.
They're trying to get this machine that David's made.
But in between that, you get Thor and Donald trying to establish their characterization and set themselves up for their series, and it has nothing to do with the Incredible Hulk. And what's David doing in the meantime? Doing something, isn't he? And then it keeps cutting back to Thor and Donald at this nightclub.
Well, what I found particularly striking was where Jack Colburn as Jack McGee turns up, and he's going to inquire at the lab to try and find David, John Doe, because the Hulk's been sighted again, and David's rushing off and hiding from him, and Jack's trying to find out the truth, and you think, yes, this is a follow-up to the TV show. And then it cuts to Donald, Blake, and Thor going out drinking, and you think, this isn't a follow-up to the TV series. What the hell is this?
I didn't enjoy that bit very much. I started enjoying the film more when Donald and David and Thor all got back together to do the plot.
Yes, and Eric Kramer as Thor. You know, what more could you want? Blonde.
I like him. I like his performance. I think he's very charismatic as an actor.
Blonde and muscled and seems out of his time.
Quite amusing performance given the material he's got to work with, which I must say isn't very good. I think he does very well.
Yeah, and seeing him and the Hulk fighting together, that's not bad. And of course, there were plans I've read to have Jack McGee in the Thor TV series, so he's after both of them trying to find out what's going on. That's why he's saying in the film the Hulk was seen running down the beach with a Viking.
Very funny delivery, because it's beyond anything that he's come across before, isn't it? It just sounds so stupid, and he lets the audience know how stupid it sounds.
Jack Colburn does some brilliant work in that film. And how sad and wrong that it's his last appearance in the franchise. It's setting him up to be chasing the Hulk in one series and Thor in another, but we never actually see him again. It's a great shame.
That is a shame. As for Donald, I was telling you, wasn't I? I didn't like him much. I didn't find the character engaging. I don't think the actor... Perhaps he's very good when the material's good, but I don't think he was able to do anything with what he was given. And then I was saying, and I think you could see what I meant, that character, sort of nerdy boy character, who's supposed to be funny, never works in things like these American teen movies, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Dollhouse, Buffy, that kind of thing. They try to have this character and have him be a comedy character, and it never works for me, at least.
Yes, I think the best sort of attempt at that actually might be Davis from True Calling, who's not exactly that kind of nerd,
yes,
but he has nerdy aspects to his character.
There has to be more to them, doesn't there, for them to work. So, two leads there. One of them, what more could you want? And the other one, not very successful.
In The Incredible Hulk Returns, you get 4 decent Hulk outs, which is okay for the hour-and-a-half TV movie, but we definitely should have seen the Hulk before the story of Thor's origin, if not actually before Thor himself. However, 3 Hulk outs, 3 inadequate Hulk outs, short and rather pointless, he doesn't really do anything, is all you get in the trial of the Incredible Hulk with Daredevil, and that is quite simply not enough. If you read the screenplay on the DVD-ROM,
which not many people can do nowadays, I shouldn't think, the
No.
way computers have evolved.
You see they cut out the 4th Hulk out where he breaks out of prison. It's supposed to have him bending the bars and smashing through the railing and smashing through the wall, but you don't see it. It all just happens off screen while the other prisoner is watching, which is a disgrace. And actually, there was never a Hulk out in the final act. act the last 20 minutes of the film. There should be 5 Hulk-outs in that movie, including the dream trial sequence with Stan Lee's cameo and the Hulk wearing purple trousers for the only time in this continuity, like he always does in the comics. But there's only the 3, and they're so short, all of them. I suppose the best one is where he actually interacts with Daredevil and rescues Daredevil from the Kingpin's trap. But then we don't see him again, the Hulk, after that. So it's really a Daredevil movie with 3 short appearances from the Hulk, rather than a Hulk and Daredevil movie mixed. And as we say, they would have mixed properly, unlike Hulk and Thor.
Daredevil, as you may know, is Matt Murdock, the lawyer, who, as a child, before he was a lawyer, was blinded by sort of chemical radioactive waste stuff. And as well as blinding him, it gave him super hearing, super sense of touch, so he can be a superhero. Which probably wouldn't happen in real life, but neither would the Hulk himself. It's more scientific than Thor, much more.
It's perfectly good stuff to share that Incredible Hulk universe, unlike Thor. Going back to the TV series in the episode Prometheus, where they're saying, oh, this meteor that's going to land might be an alien craft, oh, it's being piloted. We were like, oh, it's not, is it? This shouldn't have aliens in it. It's not that kind of sci-fi. And it's not an alien craft, it's just so that the scientists will think the Hulk might be an alien for the plot, which is fine. So if you then start introducing fantasy Thor, it's going outside the boundaries of what your audience will accept, just like at the end of Bolt, the 2008 movie.
They'll say that's completely unrealistic.
Yes. So, yeah, potential there. If the trial of the Incredible Hulk was renamed, because there is no trial, and it's a TV series finale promising but not actually happening title, baiting title, that should be changed. And if Daredevil and the Hulk were integrated and interacted like Thor and the Hulk do, then I might quite like the trial of the Incredible Hulk. I used to say it's a terrible Incredible Hulk movie and a decent Daredevil movie. Then I said, terrible movie overall. But it's okay as a Daredevil movie. You definitely get the idea of Daredevil and the Kingpin, and they create this little world quite well. Just doesn't really have the Hulk properly integrated into it.
I think another thing they could do to improve it is lighten up a bit on the tone. It's too serious.
Not a man like me. Yes, David's very reserved and not showing a lot of that humanity.
He's decided to stop getting involved in order to avoid being the Hulk, and then he's trying to save this woman from getting raped on the train after thinking maybe he doesn't want to get involved, and then he's the Hulk.
And that does make sense, doesn't it? But it's not pulled off effectively. He reminds me of Poirot on Murder on the Orient Express, ITV version, where he's suddenly very cold and very distant and very hating people in a way that you think doesn't really match up with his earlier character, even if he's in a bit of a different mood.
I think it makes more sense with David than Poirot, because all his attempts to rid himself of the Hulk have been thwarted, and you can see he actually does care about people deep down, but he's hard on himself, so he won't be the Hulk.
And then, of course, his interaction with Matt Murdock is supposed to remind him how he can be good and help and make a difference. I have a brother in the world. Super serial ending.
Yes, forgotten all about his sister, of course.
Yes! Well, in the death of the Incredible Hulk, the only family I have is you, Dr. Pratt, and Amy. What about your father and sister in Colorado, for God's sake?
Yes. Before we move on to that one, a couple of other things about Daredevil. It really does set the precedence, doesn't it? I'm not aware of it happening in superhero movies before. This is, I don't want superpowers. I don't want the bird. I don't want to be a superhero. I hate that.
I hate all that.
And Matt Murdock's doing it after he gets lured into a trap by Kingpin and beaten up by some of his smaller pins.
They always call him Wilson Fisk, his real name in that movie, rather than Kingpin, and he's trying to sort of become the Kingpin of, like, the crime syndicate across the whole country. He had all these other crime lords around. Maybe that was something they were hoping to introduce into the series, which never got commissioned.
I was finding the intricate jewellery robbery quite interesting, where various innocent-looking bystanders are in on it. The bag lady who makes everyone look at the exploding car, but it had nothing to do with the Incredible Hulk.
Yes, like I was saying, you really get the idea, don't you, of the Kingpin and of Daredevil and how they interact. Of course, the Kingpin also has featured in Spider-Man stories quite a lot. I remember he was on the Spider-Man cartoon on Live and Kicking.
And another thing is I wasn't crazy about Matt Murdock's supporting cast.
Oh, he had a lot, didn't he? He had the people at his office.
That woman who he had Erst with was just really not very interesting, was she? And the sort of... what does he do?
He's like the secretary, isn't he? The clerical assistant.
And he's supposed to be funny and a bit thick and dopey, and I didn't think he was very successful either.
And there's his version of Commissioner Gordon from Batman, who's Deputy Chief Tyndaley.
Yeah, he was okay.
Yes. He has the special radio to call up Daredevil. I said he should have a bat signal, and you said, well, Daredevil would be able to see it.
He could have a sort of ultrasonic signal that no one else could hear.
And I thought possibly the Turk would be Daredevil / Tyndaley's regular sort of informant, like Huggy Bear. A lot of potential characters for the series in that.
I remember saying to you, I guess Daredevil wasn't on Kenny's list of Marvel heroes he could adapt, because he might have gone for that. You can, as we've seen, make a very serious human Daredevil adaptation.
And how ironic that Kenny wasn't actually involved with those TV movies. I'd quite enjoyed the Daredevil one.
Not the Thor one, though. I think that was silly.
So then, in 1990, 13 years almost after the show had started, was aired The Death of the Incredible Hulk, which turned out to be, as the title kind of implies, the last one. I find it, for various reasons, which I'm sure we'll go into in a moment, unpalatable as a season finale, as a follow-on to the series itself, but that is what it is in terms of the paperwork. There was talk, one can read, of including Iron Man and She-Hulk in that movie, but eventually it was decided to include just the Incredible Hulk.
It would have been very different with other superheroes, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would.
It's much less comic booky than those other two movies.
But one thing it does have in its favour is that it has 5 full Hulk outs, mostly of decent length, which the other two films don't. They have 4 and 3. So I always thought that was something in the death of the Incredible Hulk's favour. I always quite liked the bit where Dr. Pratt, I mentioned earlier, trying to help David rid himself of the Hulk, talks about the perfect soldier, which the evil researchers want to make a sort of super soldier using the fast healing that Dr. Pratt is looking into, and Hulk is very relevant to. Perfect soldier doesn't do anything, is obsolete because there's no war. Yes, very good idea for perfect soldier, Dr. Pratt. But the rest of the film is a bit crap, really.
It's probably fine as a sort of... what are they actually doing? It's Russian.
It's all about, yes, this Russian spy cartel who are trying to get this research of Dr. Pratt for some reason. Maybe they want to make their own Russian super soldiers.
Yeah, and there's this character called Yasmin who wants out, but she keeps doing it because she believes they have got her sister captive, but then it turns out her sister's the chief of the whole operation. I mean, it's not a bad sort of story and Russian spy kind of thing. It's just not very good as an Incredible Hulk last hurrah.
Yes, it's just not the end of the Incredible Hulk TV series with Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno. And of course it's a disgrace that Jack Colvin as Jack McGee isn't in The Death. It'd be fair enough if he wasn't in the trial and then came back for the death, but no one seems to have thought of asking him, which I would find a lot less strange if he wasn't in The Incredible Hulk Returns 2 years earlier, if he hadn't come back after the TV series at all. Absolutely no reasonable explanation for why he's not in The Death, and it makes no sense. And I used to think, having watched in the late 90s The Death on television, well, at least it has a proper beginning, he starts turning into the Hulk, and a proper end. He dies, but it doesn't have a proper end at all, because Jack's not there.
Yes, He should find out, even if they're not going to take him to court and all these things that Kenny was planning. He should find out and have something to say about it. But he doesn't, which is very disappointing.
But whenever one reads about the death of the Incredible Hulk, it will inevitably say there were plans to continue the series with the rebirth of the Incredible Hulk, the revenge of the Incredible Hulk, whatever it was going to be called, and the runway set where the Hulk had fallen was left intact so they could come back and film there. And Dr. Pratt's research was going to be used to resurrect the Hulk with David's mind in the Hulk's body and that sort of thing.
Would have been a bit like Alien Resurrection.
It would really, wouldn't it? And some say that you wouldn't have seen the Hulk until the last act when David has to recreate the experiment to do something. I don't know. It all sounds a bit rubbish and unfeasible after the actual death of the Incredible Hulk. So it's probably a good thing that they left it there, because it wouldn't have got any better, would it?
No way.
Some reports say, well, obviously because of Bill Bixby's cancer and death a couple of years later, all plans had to be abandoned. Other reports say it has absolutely nothing to do with Bill Bixby's death. The whole project was scrapped before it was discovered he had cancer at all. So who knows what the truth of it is there. But I don't know, probably someone was thinking, oh well, we can still come back and do more if we get desperate, while Bill Bixby was still around. But I tend to think those 3 TV movies are a missed opportunity to come back and carry on and finish off the television series properly, palatably, which is a bit of a shame. But as we've been saying, they do have their moments. There have been other interpretations of the Hulk on screen, as we've been saying, since then, including the cartoon in the 90s. And there were films in 2003 with Eric Bana.
Everybody hated that one. I can't remember anything about it now, but I do remember watching it and thinking, what a load of absolute rubbish. And then everyone, according to the internet, agreed with me, and you thought the same.
Yes, and in 2008, in order to make up the 2003 film, perhaps in some ways, there was another film with Edward Norton as Bruce Banner and the Hulk, which tries, and in many ways succeeds, to appeal to both fans of the original comic continuity and the TV show. I was originally saying, well, we should watch that, find it, and watch it in preparation for this podcast, find the DVD. But then I was seeing a couple of bits of it on ITV2 the other week, and I was thinking, oh yes, I see how this is trying, and in some ways succeeding, to appeal to fans of both media. It's trying to be funny, he's buying stretchy pants. It's not actually funny.
Like any film nowadays, trying to be funny but isn't.
I never liked that film that much, but it's certainly better than the 2003 one.
Yes, it exists on DVD in this house because I think some years ago I was trying to build up points on my HMV card, which tells you how long ago it was. And yeah, I mean, I kind of quite like that film. I don't think about Lou Ferrigno and the rest of the gang while I'm watching it. It's a completely different animal as far as I'm concerned. And everyone says, who knows about these things, it's a good Incredible Hulk film.
And of course, they will obviously never again have a bodybuilder in green makeup playing the Incredible Hulk, but do it all CG. And I do find it less believable in a tangible world when the Hulk isn't actually there, actually picking people up and putting them in the bin and that sort of thing. So I do think the time when the Incredible Hulk TV series was made allowed it to be something very special in many ways. But doubtless we'll see other versions of it floating around for the rest of time. Superheroes are very popular and marketable at the moment. My superhero go-tos are those Superman films from the 70s and 80s, Batman 60s TV series, and the Incredible Hulk TV series. And that's all the superhero stuff I think anyone should ever really need, but I'm sure they don't all satisfy modern audiences in every way that they want to be satisfied. And there, at last, is an end to our Incredible Hulk podcast. Join us again on the final Sunday in July, when we'll be doing another podcast.
It will be my choice, Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
Until next time, good night out there.
Whatever you are.